Hello, Jessica Frost-Ballas here with a video featuring the brand new exclusive collaboration set between Hutson and Fawn, The More the Merrier. This adorable set was perfect to pair with Chibitronics LED stickers to create a magical nighttime scene. Today I'm sharing how to create a circuit with multiple lights and also how to create a slim battery holder so that your finished card is thin but sturdy enough to be mailed with regular postage, and the battery can be easily replaced without destroying the card or removed to preserve the battery. I colored my critters with a little firelight glow on their faces and bodies, and for good reason. You simply slip the battery holder into the bottom of the card and then press the rock to light up the scene. The fire glows red and the stars shine bright in the sky. This video is a little on the longer side, but if you're looking for just the circuit tutorial, you can skip ahead to about 15 minutes in. Otherwise, let's get started. First, I stamped most of the images from More the Merrier onto white cardstock with VersaFine and heat embossed them with clear embossing powder. I also stamped the bonfire onto a piece of Strathmore Bristol cardstock. Then I colored the images with Copic markers. I recently refilled many of my markers, so you'll notice that I sometimes remove both caps to equalize pressure on the markers to make sure they don't leak on my coloring. After coloring the fur of the critters, I wanted to add a little firelight glow to their faces and bodies to highlight the Chibitronics light-up effect. I blended a little YR30 and Y32 to create the highlights. When you add a light color like YR30 over the darker colored image, it lightens and removes the color almost like using the colorless blender. Then you can add the Y32 for a little more of a yellow glow. After I added the yellow shades, I went back in with the fur colors to boost the contrast. I continued this process for any image that I thought would be close enough to the fire to reflect a little glow. I continued coloring the images starting with my lightest shade and moving to the darkest, and then blending back to the lightest. After I finished coloring the images, I die cut them with the coordinating dies. Next, I colored the campfire with Copic markers. I skipped coloring the middle layer of flames because I wanted to cut that out for my light feature. I stamped the fire on a post-it note, fussy cut it, and placed it over the campfire to use as a mask. I also die cut the simple stitched hillside borders from masking paper and placed the bottom over the panel to mask off the ground. Next, I blended scattered straw Distress Oxide ink onto the panel, creating a halo effect around my campfire. I didn't want to end up with a green sky, so I heat set the panel before blending my next color. It doesn't totally keep the yellow from blending, but it definitely helps. Next, I blended Broken China, Blueprint Sketch, Chip Sapphire, and Black Soot Distress Oxide ink to finish my sky, and then dried it with my heat gun. I splattered the sky with water and blotted off the excess to create stars in the distance. Once that was dry, I placed a scrap over the scattered straw to create a mask, and then splattered the sky again with white gouache. I set that aside to dry while I worked on the ground. Next, I die cut the simple Grassy Hillside border from Strathmore Bristol cardstock and used the negative side to create a reverse Grassy arch. I blended evergreen bough, pine needles, and Black Soot Distress Oxide ink to create the grass. Then I removed the mask from the ground of my panel and covered the sky with the other mask. I blended antique linen and tea-dye Distress Oxide ink around the base of the campfire, and then blended that out with pine needles and Black Soot Distress Oxide ink. I dried everything with a heat gun and then used a paper towel to mask off the grass around the campfire ground. I splattered it with water and blotted off the excess. Then I splattered the same area with more concentrated tea dye and walnut stained Distress Oxide ink. Next, I splattered the grassy sections with water and blotted off the excess. Then I splattered that area with pine needles and black soot distress oxide ink. I removed all the masks and let my background dry completely. Once it was dry, I stamped the sentiment from More the Merrier onto the panel with Versamark and heat embossed it with white embossing powder. Then I used a craft knife to carefully cut out the middle layer of flames. If you're skipping the lights, you'd skip this step and color the middle layer. Next, I adhered the grassy arch to my background panel. Then I arranged all the rest of the elements and adhered them to the panel. At this point, you could call it done and have a cheery summer scene, but I wanted to step it up a bit and add a fun interactive element. First, I used a small hole punch to cut out 5 circles in the sky for stars. This punch cuts an 1/8 inch circle. Next, I took an A2 landscape card base and lined it up behind the background panel. I used a pencil to trace the circles and the flame outline onto the base. I also traced the circles on an A2 panel of fun foam. Then I used the same punch to cut the circles out of the foam, and I used a craft knife to cut out the flames. Using the fun foam panel ensures that the card is nice and sturdy, and the light shines only where I want it. Then it was time to create my battery holder. I'm using an idea from my super talented Chibitronics teammate June. She created a removable battery holder so that you can preserve and, if needed, replace batteries in your Chibitronics light-up cards. First, I took a panel of white cardstock cut to 1 inch by 6 3/4 inch. Then I scored the panel at 1 1/4, 2 1/2, 3 3/4, and 5 1/4 inches. I folded the score lines back and forth to create an accordion-like piece. June uses a 2 cm circle die, which is perfectly sized to hold the battery, but I couldn't find a die exactly that measurement in my stash, so I modified it a bit. I have a circle die that cuts 3/4 inch from the Hero Arts Infinity Circle nesting dies, and a circle die that cuts just a hair bigger than 2 cm from the Fawn and Chibitronics Merry Mice set. I start by folding the end of the panel over once on the end with the 1 1/4 inch score lines. Then using a piece of purple tape, I tape the larger circle die over the end and run it through my die cutting machine. At this point, I've die cut 2 circles, which is about all my die cutting machine can handle in one pass. I unfold the end and fold up the next section, so there's one die cut section folded on top of a solid section. Then I tape the circle over the already die cut section and run it through my machine again. This allows me to line up the die to make sure it's cutting exactly the right spot each time. I repeat this process until I get to the last scored section. This time I line up the smaller circle die in the center of the die cut circle, tape it in place and run it through my machine. Once all my circles are cut, I fold up my accordion again. The larger circles that I cut allow my battery to sit securely in the holder, but the smaller circle on the bottom prevents the battery from falling through. Next, I use liquid glue to glue the accordion shut. I firmly press it together and let it dry. Once it's completely dry, I use a corner chomper to decoratively trim the edge into a nice shape. Next, I figure out where I want to place the battery holder on my card and line it up on the foam panel. I trace around the battery holder on the foam panel and then cut it out. For some reason I wasn't thinking, and I also traced the battery circle on the foam panel, but that isn't necessary. I also cut out a small rectangle to the side of the battery holder and keep it for later. This will be used for our circuit building. Next, I line the foam panel up on the back of the background panel and trace the battery holder in a small rectangle. I do the same on the card base. Now it's time to start building my circuit on the card base. I start by tracing the hole of the battery holder, and then I mark the negative and positive side of my circuit for reference. As you'll see, even after years of working with Chibitronics, I still occasionally mess up the mechanics, so writing notes in the panel can be super helpful. Next, I draw a circle where I want to place my light under the flame. Then I erase the flame outline I traced earlier. I know it's a little tricky to see my pencil markings on video, but I will share photos of the various circuit building steps later so that you can pause and look at them. Next, I use my Chibitronics stencil to trace around each point where I want a light. This step isn't necessary, but it does make it a little easier to see where the lights will go when you want the light in a precise spot. Again, for reference, I mark the positive and negative sides of each triangle. You can pause here to study the circuit a little more easily. Next, I sketch out lines to show where I'll need to place my copper tape. This allows me to work out any potential corners I'll have to work around, and as you can see, I have a lot of them here. And also, as you'll see, allows me to make mistakes that are easily erasable before I start messing with the copper tape. I knew I'd have some sharp angles, so I changed my mind and started working on the negative side first. And then I realized I messed up the circuit, erased a bit, and started again. So yes, sketching the circuit out first is highly recommended. You'll want to connect the positive side of the battery, illustrated here with a small rectangle, to the positive side of each light sticker, which is the long side of the sticker. and the negative side of the battery, illustrated here with the circle, to the negative side of each light sticker, which is the point of the triangle. Again, you can pause here to see how we'll be laying out the copper tape. Now I start laying the copper tape along the sketch lines. When I come to a corner, I simply fold the tape back on itself in the opposite direction of where I want it to go, crease it, and then fold it back in the new direction. I carefully tape along the entire circuit, and then I use a bone folder to really press down the copper tape so there are no lumps and bumps in the circuit. Make sure that even in tight spaces, your two lines of tape never touch, or the circuit won't connect correctly. After all the tape is laid down, it's time to add the LED stickers. I'm using a red light for the fire and white lights for the stars. After I've adhered all the stickers, I test my circuit by placing the negative side of the battery on the circle I traced and touching the positive side of the battery to the positive line of the circuit with a scrap piece of copper tape. I test often throughout the process so I can troubleshoot any potential problems before they become big problems. Once I confirm that my circuit is working, I take little pieces of copper tape and put them over the positive and negative sides of my stickers just to make sure they're firmly adhered to the circuit. And this is the finished circuit panel on my card base. Now we need to add a little tape to the back of the background panel and foam panel so that the circuit will complete. First, I add a piece of copper tape over the small rectangle I traced on the back of the background panel. I trace the battery circle over the battery holder and then fold the tape over, making sure it covers the battery circle. Next, I use scraps of vellum to cover my stars and fire. Now I take the little foam rectangle that I saved from earlier on in the process. This is the important piece that connects the circuit from the back of the background panel to the card base. I use conductive fabric tape from Chibitronics and wrap it around the little foam rectangle before popping it back into the foam panel. The tape ends should touch around the rectangle. You could also wrap it with copper tape, but I find that the fabric tape is a little more reliable going around the foam. Again, before going any further, I place the foam over the card base, pop in my battery holder, and test the circuit to make sure everything is working. And it is. Next, I apply adhesive tape to my card base and then carefully adhere it to the foam. Make sure you don't put any adhesive over the traced battery holder. Then I add adhesive to the back of my background panel and adhere that to the foam. Again, make sure to not apply adhesive over the battery holder. I slide the battery holder in to figure out where I need to place the directions for my interactive card. I stamp the Push Here sentiment from Merry Mice onto a rock and adhere it over the battery. When the recipient receives the card, they know where to push to light up the scene. Off camera, I added a few more images to fill out the scene. Then I added crystal glaze to the flames and moon and sprinkled them with a mix of chunky and Prisma glitter for a little extra sparkle to finish the card. Phew! And that's it! I hope you enjoyed my video today. If you have any questions about the colors I used for my images or the circuit building process, please feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to help you out. You can find links to all the products I used in the YouTube description below or over on my blog. And remember, S'more the Merrier is an exclusive set available only at Hutson, so click the link below to snag yours today. Thanks so much for watching, have an amazing day, and happy crafting! Bye!